Behold the man within his state of quintessential slumber, eyes wide shut, deaf to all things but screams of fear and pain, mute in all ways but for screams of fear and pain, blind to all things but for fear and pain and dream. What is this man? For he who is all of deaf, mute, and blind? He sees forms, or at least his cognitive interpretation of forms. He hears sounds, or at least as per his cognitive interpretation of sounds, he creates sounds, at least as far as he is concerned. Yet he objectively does none of these things. Logic, they may say, is the highest value of epistemology, yet will at the same time demand evidence of logic's persistence, which is of course highly illogical. It can be said that all men are capable only of solving the problems they allow themselves to see. This seems logical. The human mind is highly inhibitory, so it would seem natural for that to be the case. How strong are these inhibitory structures? How deeply are we deluded into our perception being seen as normal, regular? Is our perception not merely absolutely pathetic in comparison to our real world? Much of the mind is like that of the state, which exhibits a mechanism for survival above all other things. The state will tell its subjects the narratives it hopes will best enable the continuation of the state. That is to say, that wherein there exists a state, there exists merely a will and an associated narrative, a sublime fiction of coordinated coercion generated through majority submission to this now state. In essence, the state is the agglomerated order meant to stave off the true chaos that exists outside of it. These conceptions run directly parallel with that of the human mind, which is difficult to ignore, and one might hope that the parallels would end rather quickly. However, this is not so, for the parallels run deep within the structure of the mind, and from this we can conclude that the existence of the state is not merely something that can be said to be completely conscious of structure, for much of it stems from unconscious motivations. Why does this need to be said? When it comes to understanding things, one must not be perturbed by the information which comes forth. One must be willing to embrace the truth within our contemporary Pandora's boxes, if only just to peek at it but a little. From it, you will find incomprehensible truths, but undeniable ones. From this fountain you will find that which is the most valuable, the boon, the golden fleece, the goose which lays the golden eggs. But this is never given freely. It comes at a great cost. You must first slay the dragon to attain the princess. You just psychologically slay the tyrannical mother in order to attain the real woman behind it, or suffer in remaining the forever child. Peter Pan's boys. The state cares not for anyone lest it affects the security of the state to do so. It cares not for vanity, love, honor, truth, value, children, orphans, mothers, fathers, families, friends, animals, governance, pain, cruelty, charity, money, well-being, materials. Even to consciousness it heeds not to, nor does it ordain value. The state simply cares for nothing but its own perpetuation. It doesn't even care for itself into the enduring future. Inasmuch as it can manifest order in order to survive, it does. All other factors are completely and utterly logically irrelevant. It must be deeply stressed that this is the case. We all know examples of this. The state perpetuating itself in the face of ethical or moral considerations, which some even of the simplest people could understand if left known. Perhaps the likes of Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, or Chelsea Manning could be considered examples of this. They may not have been perfect beings, but what a ridiculous measure of credulity, that of it being an incredibly incredulous measure, and one cannot deny that they were at least in part trying to make us all conscious of the mistakes and real incredulity of our state. Notice the reaction. Notice the denial of conscious reality replaced by a narrative which completely aligns itself with the narrative presented to the state's apparatus. Isn't it just too coincidental? Do you even as an individual grant such narrative force to the state? If you do, ponder as to why that is the case. If no, then perhaps you have already pondered as to why the state does what it does, and have realized that each and every single state action is 100% cynical. If we consider the state as the manifest collective consciousness as perpetuated in coercive force, then what does that tell us about ourselves in comparison? we can consciously recognize that the state does unethical and immoral things, and perhaps some of us are willing to admit as much. We also recognize and agree mostly that individuals who consistently display such poor ethical or immoral behavior are guilty of some offense and should be duly reprimanded, branded, punished, or redeemed based on our laws, rules, and customs. Yet no mechanism as such exists for the actions of the state. Why? Perhaps it is just impossible. Perhaps it would be akin to punishing the bull for the state of the china shop. Or perhaps it is baked into the concept of the perpetuation of the state at all costs, regardless of ethical or moral implications. All becomes justified in the perception of the state. The implications that arise from these ideas are that in much the same way a person might hide or veil their problems rather than confront them in order to avoid a certain amount of pain or suffering, so does the state. It needs to be noted that when individuals fail to digest the thing which is causing them such anxieties, that these anxieties will inevitably digest them. And so it is the same with the state. The state will in plain sight enact that which we all know to be wrong, in the hopes that in doing so, its perpetuation is guaranteed. We call ourselves good, moral, and ethical, yet we do not interfere with the state except with no other option. We sweep the wrongs and irregularities of the state under the collective rug, not unlike many individuals who do the same with their own inadequacies. The state is a reflection of our collective inadequacy. It has no authority beyond which we collectively pass down to it. It has no moral sense except that which the collective dresses it up in. The pathology of the state is a direct reflection of our collective consciousness and unconsciousness, inasmuch as the state can be a path to our ruin. It can never be the path to our salvation, our redemption. This can come only as a result of our own journeys as individual actors within the living world, for we are as living beings, and the state is an imaginative idol, which without actors within it is no different than an ancient Roman amphitheater. Who is it who acts within but ghosts? Likewise, what force does the empire now sway, swept away by the sands of time? The epoch of such a state is long past, yet we see its skeletal remains, its decayed structures. Herein lies the past, we think, yet herein lie the future. The narrative tale of history renews itself wherever we find mankind, and like a yarn followed back to its origins, we discover not only our past, but our future yet to be. So walk gently within your duality. You are the state, yet nothing of that sort. The state can perceive pathology in the will of each and every individual and will persecute them as such. But the individual is also at the same time its only hope for redemption. The state can never redeem the individual. The collective can never redeem an individual. Only the individual can possibly redeem, transform, and revivify. All alternatives lead to stone, the state of Ozymandias.